All right, good morning, everyone. We've got a really interesting story from Acts this morning, and what I thought we would do is read the second half of chapter 17 before we get into what I've found. And we've got a special guest commentator to introduce the story.
Sure. Now, while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw the city was full of idols. Therefore he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and with the Gentile worshippers, and in the marketplace daily with those who happened to be there. Some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also conversed with him, and some said, "What does this babbler wish to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities, because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection." And they took him and they brought him to the Areopagus and said, "May we know what this new doctrine is of which you speak? For you are bringing some strange things to our ears. Therefore we want to know what these things mean." For all the Athenians and the foreigners residing there spent their time in nothing other than saying or hearing some new thing. So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said,
"Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I was passing through and considering the objects of your worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' Therefore, the one whom you worship without knowing, him I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he served with men's hands as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life, breath, and all things. And he made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings, so that they might seek God, if they might touch him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we are living, and we are moving, and we are being, as also some of the prophets among you have said, for we are also his offspring. Therefore, being the offspring of God, we ought not to suppose the divine to be like gold or silver or stone, a sculpture of the skill and thinking of a man. Truly these times of ignorance God overlooked, but now commands all men everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead."
Now when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, but others said, "We will hear you again about this." So Paul went out from their midst. But some men joined him and believed, among whom also were Dionysius the Areopagite, and a woman named Damaris, and others with them.
Thank you, commentator. Anything strike you as you heard that story being read and as you heard the speech?
And also an unknown God, but they're just eager to worship him.
Yeah. And apparently there's a story from a number of centuries before about one of their own leaders. There was something going on and he talked about all of the various gods, and then to make sure that we're not missing one, there's let's worship this unknown God. So that was a concept that had been around for a long time, and we'll see what Paul does with that, which is really, really clever. Any? Oh, can we have a microphone for yeah?
Yeah, Dan is to mute it.
Anything else anyone noticed? No, all good. All right, let's crack into it. So the story begins. Now, while Paul was waiting for them at Athens. So every story has a context. And if we go to the next slide, we've got the two main players here is Athens, which is the where, and Paul, which is the who. So Athens is a very important Greek city. It was one thing I read said that Athens was effectively the world centre of religion. Pretty much every religion you could imagine, and then some, were there at Athens. And one of their own made a famous statement at one stage that it's easier to find an idol in Athens than it is to find a person. So that was kind of how religious the city was. And it was also a centre of Greek philosophy. And so arrives Paul. He's a Jew, he's been converted to Christianity, and he's the apostle to the Gentiles. And we could spend, the rest of the week talking about the background of Athens or the background of the story of Paul, but that's the context. And so for us, we have a context. We're in New Zealand. In the census for the first time, this last census, the majority of New Zealanders had on their census paper no religion. So we used to be a Christian country, but that's increasingly becoming a thing of the past. So that's our context. And us, who are we? What's our story? God used Paul. How can God use us and our story and our background? So this was the result of the census. Over 50% no religion, just above 30% Christian. And then look at all of these others. Hindu, Islam, Maori spirituality, Buddhism, Sikhism, and Judaism and others that were less than 1%. I would imagine so, but I'm only guessing there. I would think there would be more than the 1% of Mormons, and I mean that raises the question: what's the definition of Christian? But I guess that would be for the purpose of the census. Yeah, good point. So Paul's there in Athens, and it says his spirit was provoked within him as he saw that the city was full of idols. So Athens is full of idols, and that word provoked actually comes from the root word that means sharp. So this is not just some cruisy, calm, indifferent, apathetic kind of response. This is he's walking through and it's like, this is really hitting me. This is painful. It really affected him in his heart and in his spirit. And someone I was reading pointed out that the first two of the 10 Commandments is, you shall have no other gods besides me, and you shall not make for yourselves a carved image. So there we are in his face, on every street corner is these people are just trashing the first two of the 10 Commandments. So comparing I know it's a picture of Cambridge, but comparing Hamilton, over half don't have a belief, 3 Islamic mosques, 3 Sikh Gurdwaras, 4 Hindu temples. So what's our reaction? Is that something that's challenging, that's uncomfortable? What's happening in our spirit? I mean, I often drive past some of these buildings. Are we indifferent or are we motivated? Just a question. So actually back to that previous slide. So 200 years before, a Greek king came to Jerusalem, which is, Paul's a Jew, Jerusalem's the capital. A couple of 100 years before, a Greek king had come to Jerusalem, had banned people carrying out Jewish religious practices, had put an idol of Zeus on one of the altars in the temple and had offered a pig on one of the other altars. So that's the background of Greeks versus Jews. So is Paul here in Athens thinking, well, I hate these guys, I know what they did to us, 200 years ago? No, he's hurting. Any idea what that sharp reaction? There's a couple of possibilities there as to what that would have been about. Has anyone got any ideas? Yeah.
My guess would be one of sadness, of he's come to realize the truth and he now realizes all of these other things are false, and so is provoked to do something about it.
So who's Paul concerned about? He's concerned about the people. So he's having this sharp reaction about all of these people that are lost. Who else might he have been concerned about? Zach is pointing up. God. He might have been jealous for God, thinking, all of these people are worshipping all these other gods. Where's the one true God? This shouldn't be happening. This is not right. So he might have been jealous for God and he might have been concerned for the people. All right, next. So, therefore, he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and with the Gentile worshippers and in the marketplace daily with those who happened to be there. So his reaction was the emotion, and now this is his response. He wants to do something about it. And so he gets into action. He reasons with them. Now, interesting that on a previous journey, Paul had been dragged out of a city presumed dead because he was preaching. He's just come, the last 2 towns that he's been in, he's basically been run out of town by angry mobs that don't, and Jewish mobs that don't want to hear what he has to say. And yet, he wants to go back in there and talk to these same race of people that have reacted so badly and virtually killed him one time. It doesn't stop him because Jesus had said to him, I have appeared to you for this purpose, to make you a minister and a witness, both of the things which you have seen and of the things which I will yet reveal to you. I will deliver you from the Jewish people as well as from the Gentiles, to whom I now send you, to open their eyes, in order to turn them from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and an inheritance among those who are sanctified by faith in me. So Paul's got a job to do. And if people kill him, if they stone him, if they run him out of town, it makes no difference. He's got a job to do. So he could have stopped preaching out of fear, but he engaged with them, he talked, he discussed, he gave them reasons. So what about us? What are our past experiences? Are we being held back by a fear that didn't stop Paul? Do we engage with people? Do we talk? Do we discuss? Do we give them reasons like Paul did? Let's have another look at that verse. There's two places where he goes. He reasoned in the synagogue with two groups of people, with the Jews and with the worshippers. The verse says worshippers assumed to be Gentiles who were there in the synagogue, who were worshipping God, but they weren't Jews. So we've got Jews and Gentile worshippers in the synagogue, and so he's there talking to them, debating, discussing, and in the marketplace daily with those who happen to be there. So there's two specific groups of people, the religious people, and then in the marketplace with absolutely anyone. So that covers everybody. So for Paul, the Jews were his people. The worshippers were other believers who were not his people, but they were still believers in God. And the third group was everybody else. So what about for us? Who's the equivalent of the Jews for us? Who are our people that we might want to discuss things with? Any thoughts?
Our Christian family, our Christian believers, other Christian believers.
Yeah. So who are the other believers? Oh, hang on. So maybe the other Christian believers are the other believers. So who are our people? The ones that we actually identify with. The local church. It might be with Unitarians. Whatever group it is that we actually, I'm one of them. I identify with them. And then there's other believers, and then there's everyone else. And it might be that it's a different message for each of those three groups. And that's what we want to think about a bit harder for most of the rest of this morning. Right, so now we've got some specific groups of people. Some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also conversed with him. So I did a bit of research into the Epicureans. So they believed in gods, multiple gods. But they believed that the gods lived in another realm, were distant, were not involved at all in humans, actually weren't even involved in creation. They were just in a separate world altogether, that the ultimate reality is physical, it's matter, the universe is eternal. They believed in evolution, would you believe? So evolution's not some, modern thing that Darwin thought up. It's back from the Greeks from thousands of years ago. They didn't believe in an afterlife. And the highest good was pleasure, avoidance of physical and mental pain. And so their focus was on the present life. Now, what does that sound like to you? Secular atheism. All over again. So the question for us is, what aspect of the gospel is most relevant to people with these atheistic, materialistic beliefs? If there is a God, we don't need to worry about him, there's no afterlife, we got here by evolution. What advantage does the gospel provide that is missing from their current worldview? What would attract somebody like that to think, wow, you've actually got something worthwhile. I'd be interested to look into it a bit more. Hope for a future, absolutely, yes. Now the Stoics, they had quite a different view. For them, God actually wasn't a person as such, but was like a rational force. Interesting the names they had for that God of theirs. Some of them called God Logos, which means word and is in the prologue of John's Gospel. Does anyone know what the Greek word pneuma means? Very good. Breath or spirit. Yeah. So this impersonal force was called reason, logos, or spirit, pneuma. They also believed that the universe was eternal, but they believed that humanity was the offspring of God and that each of us have a divine spark inside us. And their highest good was virtue. And they had 4 key virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, and self-control. But again, their focus was on the present. They wanted to be the best person they could be in this life now because the focus wasn't on the afterlife. So for them, what beliefs do we have in common with them that could create a connection? Because there are some belief systems these days that are quite similar to that. Does anyone know what the name for belief systems that don't have a personal God but have got this impersonal force? There's a particular name for it. Possibly, but that's not the word I'm looking for. The word is pantheism. And so there are some of the Eastern religions that are pantheistic where it's not so much about gods, but about these things like karma and, things, the principles of the universe kind of thing. So, we've got a bit more in common with people that believe that sort of thing. So what beliefs do we have in common that could create a connection? And how could the gospel enhance? There's some truth in what these people believed, but how could the gospel enhance what they already believe? So we have some negative responses. Some said, "Oh, what does this babbler wish to say? What's he burbling on about? He doesn't know what he's talking about," kind of thing. Have we ever had a negative reaction? Have we ever been dismissed, disrespected, or mocked? And what effect did it have on us? Others said, "He seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities." So that was kind of a respectful response. They were listening and trying to understand what he was trying to get across. So have we ever had a respectful reaction? And what effect did that have on us? So I guess what I'm encouraging us to do, each time we read the scripture, we can read it through the lens of what was it like back then? What did these things mean back then? What would it have been like to have been Paul, in Athens having these conversations? But we know that all of these things are written for our learning, and so then the next step is to think, well, what's that telling me? What useful questions is that raising for me, or what could I learn from this? So what they were responding to was Paul preaching Jesus and the resurrection. And it's interesting that in Acts chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 10, chapter 13, the main speeches that we've had a look at so far, they're all about Jesus and the resurrection. And so there's a sense in which the message to everybody includes some common themes, but then there are other things that will be different depending on who the audience is. So it's possible that they were misunderstanding Paul because they thought he was talking about strange gods. Paul's message was Jesus and resurrection. In the Greek, Jesus is a male name and resurrection is the word anastasis, which is a female word. And so it's possible that they heard Jesus and anastasis and thought, oh, there's a male god called Jesus and there's a female god called anastasis. We don't know that for sure, but what it does is it raises the question of the importance of being understood. Because as Christians, we can use big words that people will mainly only find in the Bible, and the people listening may not be able to understand. Or it may be that we're talking to somebody for whom English is a second language, and it's really, really important for us to be able to express ourselves simply and clearly so that people will understand. How can we ensure that other people accurately receive the message that we're sharing? So they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, "May we know what this new doctrine is of which you speak?" So they're interested. They're not just rejecting him out of hand. They want to know more. So have we ever had someone wanting to know more? And what was that like? And as you know, we've Cheryl and I have got someone that lives in our neighbourhood that is from an Eastern background, that's studying Confucius, but wants to know about Christianity. And so this is exactly the kind of interaction that we're having, similar to what Paul was having back in the day. So just interesting background to Areopagus or Areopagus. Maybe I'll call it Mars Hill because I know how to pronounce that. What was his name? Does anyone know the names of the really, really famous Greek philosophers? Plato, and Plato was a student of Socrates. So there was Socrates, Plato, and the name of the other main one eludes me. Aristotle. That's right. But what was the one starting with S? That's it. Socrates, 400 years before, had come to Areopagus because this was the place where criminal trials were held. Like he was the leading philosopher of the day, but two things that he was known for was one, and even today, we have what's called the Socratic method of questioning. Does anyone know what that is? It's a particular way of asking questions to get to the root of a matter. And people were really uncomfortable with Socrates because he was undermining some of their most cherished beliefs by simply asking good questions. And so he was brought on trial, and one of the things that he was doing was that he was challenging the belief in their gods. So he was tried at Areopagus, which is where Paul is now going to be standing, and he was put to death for asking good questions and questioning their gods. So what's Paul been doing? And he now goes to the very site where that had happened a few hundred years earlier. So you see how context matters. All right. So you're bringing some strange things to our ears. Therefore, we want to know what these things mean. And so what's Paul's position? Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. And so that's the fundamental challenge for us out of this story. For all the Athenians and the foreigners residing there spent their time in nothing other than saying or hearing some new thing. So that's what their culture was keen on. What's our culture keen on? What's our culture known for? And how might that help us to reach people? Because, what the Athenians loved to do just played right into Paul's hands. He's got a new thing. They want to hear new things. We make a great team. So how might that apply to us in Aotearoa, New Zealand today? So now we get to Paul's speech on Mars Hill. So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious." What do you notice about his beginning?
He's agreeing with them. He's finding neutral ground.
Yep, he is. He's finding common ground and he's being very respectful. He could have said, "You idiots, what do you think you're doing?" How do you think that would have gone down? Whereas he's acknowledging something good about what they're doing. They're being religious. They're thinking about these spiritual things. And we need to have an attitude of respect to other people. How many times have we been involved in a conversation where we've got heated or we've got angry or we've got upset? With gentleness and respect. For passing through and considering the objects of your worship, I even found an altar in which had been inscribed, "To an unknown God." So he's finding common ground. This is something he's literally seen in the city, and he's now going to use that. So we need to be on the lookout for ways to connect and find common ground with other people. If that's with other Christians, it's our belief in God and Jesus and in the Bible. If it's with Muslims, it might be the belief that there's one God, and they also believe certain things that we believe about Jesus. And so with each of these groups, let's see if we can find some common ground in which we can connect, we can feel good towards each other, which then gives us a platform to speak into their lives. And he uses this as the springboard to get him to the message that he wants to deliver. So I've seen this altar, the unknown God. So you're aware that there's a God that you don't know about? I know of a God that you don't know about. Therefore, the one whom you worship without knowing, him I proclaim to you. How might we use common ground as a springboard to segue into sharing the gospel? And so he starts his message. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth. So how's this going to land with the audience that he's talking to? The people in Athens had a view of God that was very different. And the view that Paul's presenting, they believed many gods. The Epicureans had a materialistic view of the origin. They didn't believe that God made the world. The Stoics didn't believe in a personal God. So he's saying things that are directly relevant to some of the key beliefs that they've got. And he's putting a different point of view. Actually, there is a God, there is a personal God, an individual person who made the world. And not only that, he's the Lord of heaven and earth. He's not one of these gods that's away somewhere else, that's not even interested in what's going on the earth. He's the Lord of heaven and earth. He's in charge of what goes on down here. He does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life, breath, and all things. So here he is. He's in a place that's chocker full of temples and idols made with hands. And so he has to make it clear that the true and living God is not like that at all. This is a totally different concept of God. God doesn't need anything from us. He doesn't need us to bring him food or anything like that. He's just not like that at all. He's way, way more powerful and wonderful than any of these limited views of gods that you guys have got. So in Athens, where God is worshipped by building elaborate temples and making idols. And he made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings. You see how much control and power and input God has into the lives of humans on the earth. Whereas the Epicurean belief, God didn't create humans, God's not interested in humans or the earth, we actually don't even need to be worried about him because he's totally irrelevant. And the reason that God's done this is that we might seek God and therefore touch him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. So this idea that in some sense we can reach out and touch God. We can feel God. We can encounter God because he's actually quite close to each one of us. And so it may be that for Muslims, they might feel, yes, we've got a God that created us, but he's not close like this God. And it might be that we come from an Eastern view where God is not a person and actually my future depends on me. There's no help from any supernatural being. It's all up to me. Whereas Christianity has a God who's close to us. We can reach out and touch him. We can connect with him. We can talk to him and he hears us. Wow, what a difference. Much more attractive view than the Epicurean view or the Stoic view that God is not a person at all. For in him we are living and we are moving and we are being. Does anyone know why he says that? He's actually quoting from a poem of one of their own, a guy called Epimenides from the 6th century BC, from Crete. He's quoting word for word. So not only has he created the common ground of, hey, you guys are really religious, I respect that, and, the unknown God, I'll tell you about the unknown God. Now he's quoting from their own poets. So whereas when he's talking to the Jews, what does he do in Acts chapter 2? He's got these big lengthy quotes from the Old Testament. What would be the point of quoting the Old Testament here? It's like they don't even believe it. But they respect their poets. So you see how he's multi-layering, building this common ground. And for in him we are living and moving and we are being. And just to enhance that thought about what does it mean for us to be living and moving and having our being in God, did you know that inside each human body there are trillions of living things? Bacteria and organisms and viruses and all of these things, which if they were talking to each other, they could say, in Michael, we are living and moving and having our being, because that's literally true. And so it's like, if I think it's in Jeremiah where God says, do not I fill heaven and earth? And so it's like, while God may have a specific location by his Spirit, he fills heaven and earth. So literally, we are living and moving and having our being in God. Wow, what a concept. And as also some of the poets among you have said, for we are also his offspring. And that's a quotation from another poem written a few centuries later by Aratus, a Stoic poet from Cilicia. This is even more powerful because that word offspring is the Greek word, I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's spelt Genos, from which we get genus and genealogy and genetics and all of those things. And so the word literally means kin, kind, family, people, race, progeny, lineage. So this is saying that we are actually God's family. Like he's created us. We are his offspring. And so Paul does something brilliant here. Therefore, again, he's springboarding off something really important from their own people. Therefore, being the offspring of God, we ought not to suppose the divine to be like gold or silver or stone, a sculpture made by the skill and thinking of a man. Because if we are the family of God, then God's going to be quite a bit like us. And we're nothing like gold or silver or stone or any of those other things that you're using to depict God, which is probably why God said, I don't want you making graven images to pretend that they look like me, because they're nothing like me. And so this is actually an argument that we can use with people who don't believe in God. The Epicureans, like atheists today, cannot explain how these things, which are part of us, can come simply from physics and chemistry, from matter, life, consciousness, thought, awareness, imagination, abstract thought, logic, reason, foresight, wisdom, memory, self-reflection, emotion. You try and get that out of a rock. It's just not there. And so effectively the atheists are saying, that's my father, is just matter, physics and chemistry. Where does all of this other stuff come from? They have no idea. They can't even explain what some of these things are. And so what Paul's doing is he's saying, we know what we're like, and we know that God is going to be even greater than us because he made us, but he's going to have all of that and a whole lot more. So we've got the evidence in ourselves about God. Just a brilliant way of springboarding from the things that they already know and believe to implications that maybe they haven't really thought of. Truly these times of ignorance God overlooked, but now commands all men everywhere to repent. The people in Athens were the most knowledgeable, wise, philosophical people on the planet, and Paul is calling them ignorant. Because he's fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed, and of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. And you notice that so far in the speech, he hasn't mentioned God's name and he hasn't mentioned Jesus' name. He's just talking in general terms. He's wanting to set the platform before going into detail. And when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, negative reaction. Others said, we will hear you again about this, respectful reaction. So Paul went out from their midst, but some men joined and believed, positive reaction, among whom also were Dionysius the Areopagite and a woman named Damaris and others with them. All right, so in our context, what do we have in common with the people in our community? How can we use that to share the gospel with them? How could the gospel enhance what they already believe? What are the main differences between us and people with other beliefs? What aspects of Christianity might be attractive to them? What might be missing from their worldview that belief in Christ will give them? Why would people from these other worldviews want to become Christians? What might be attractive to them? So that's the questions about the Athens that we live in. What about us? What if, like Paul, we were to have a jealousy for God, a passion for the lost, a willingness to engage with people, a relevant message to share, courage in the place of fear, always looking out for opportunities, expecting a variety of responses, being aware of the common ground and the differences, and using them as a springboard to share the gospel. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason of the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect.